Welcome, everybody, to this week's podcast episode for the Financial Freedom for Physicians podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Liu. And as you know, I talk about 4 different types of freedom: time, financial, location, health freedom. And I'm always trying to bring guests that are doing amazing things in their lives, helping others, trying to bring them across your path so maybe you can come away with inspiration, knowledge, something to empower you. So today we have a very special guest. Her name is Bobbi Kahler. She's one of the top 10 guests on Podmatch. And her mission is to help people lead their lives, not just live by default. And so that kind of ties into the mission of empowering people to take advantage and not just be at the whims of the economy or what the government is doing. And so I'd like to welcome Bobbi to the show. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, Christopher.
Yeah, we were talking backstage and tell us, you have a very interesting story. I'm always interested in the comeback person. So tell us more about where you started and how you came to be.
Yeah. Well, the comeback, I needed to come back. When I was 23, let's just say I did not have a very good year when I was 23, right? Everything went wrong. I was working 2 jobs. I was barely keeping my head above water. It was so bad. I was eating that tuna fish macaroni salad, I was eating like 5 times a week because that's what I could afford, And so it was New Year's Eve. And the other thing I should say too, part of this is I had not gone to college yet because my parents did not believe in education. In fact, I had to fight with my mom to stay in high school. So there it is. It's New Year's Eve. I'm 23 and I worked my 2 jobs. I went home to my little dark apartment and I thought, how did my life end up this way? How did it end up that way? And so the answer that came back to me is that your life is a reflection of the choices that you've made so far. And at first that wasn't very satisfying because I think in my 23-year-old heart, I really wanted someone or something to blame. I wanted someone to come rescue me. And in that moment, it's like, nobody's coming to rescue you. And even though, on one hand, you could say, well, that's not very hopeful. On the other hand, I thought it's super hopeful, right? Because that means I can do that for myself. I don't have to wait for someone else. I don't have to wait for, to be rescued. I can do that for myself. And I really thought, well, hey, if it's true, my life is a reflection of the choices that I've made so far. If I learn how to make better choices, I can get a better result. And that's what kind of started me on this path. I started studying self-leadership. I started studying communication. I started studying what we now know of as emotional intelligence. We didn't call it that back then, but that's what it was. And, eventually it led me to make some big changes. I put myself through college. I went on to get my master's degree. I paid for it all myself. And it just set me on the path of this is how I want to help others, because I think too often we live that default life, and it doesn't have to be that way. We can create something more for ourselves.
Yeah, it's very powerful because once you realize that, so the reason why I love entrepreneurship is because everything is in your hands. You succeed, it's you, and then if you fail, it's you. So you don't have anybody to blame. So you can't blame a job or the economy or. So that's why it's so empowering. Then what's really interesting is that so you talk about you talk about 3 fundamental truths. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. Well, that directly comes out of that experience, because the fundamental truth number 1 is that the future can be changed. It is not set in stone, right? And I think that sometimes we think, well, we've started down this path and there's no way I can change. And that's not true. We can always change it. Fundamental number 2 is that you can change your future, and perhaps only you can change your future, which goes back to that whole thing about we don't have to wait to be rescued. And then fundamental truth number 3 is that you don't have to wait. You can learn what you need to learn along the way. And I included that one because in coaching so many people, what I've seen is people think, I have to have all the answers. I have to know every detail before I can get started. And that's simply not true. In fact, you can't know everything until you do get started. Think about, you mentioned being an entrepreneur. How much do you learn every day being an entrepreneur?
It's a ton.
Yeah, so that doesn't have to be a stumbling block. So that's my 3 fundamental truths.
And then we talk. So what's that? That's really, that's very empowering. And then you talk about, I guess, mental resiliency and fitness, which is really interesting because, usually fitness and conditioning is like a physical thing, but you talk about it in terms of mental and emotional. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So you're right. I love the analogy to physical fitness, right? Because we all know if I'm going to go run a marathon, I'm probably going to have to do training first. I'm not just going to sit on the couch and then one day say, I'm going to go run a marathon. Well, we could, but probably it's not going to end very well, right? But with mental fitness, and mental fitness is different than mental health, right? So mental fitness is, researchers define it this way. It is our capacity to respond to life's challenges and opportunities with a positive mindset rather than a negative, neutral, or stressed mindset. And that's really important because when we respond with a positive mindset, that's when we have the best access to our brain's resources. Things like resiliency, creativity, we see more options, we can take clear-headed action with confidence. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's so important that we build mental fitness. And it's something that can be built. It's just a lot of us have never heard of it. And to be, completely straightforward, it's based on the work of positive intelligence. So it's just a wonderful blending of a lot of different sciences.
I think, I studied Tony Robbins, which is, he's been key on talking about using emotions to leverage performance. Mm-hmm. And, really putting yourself in a positive state so that you can access more positive emotions to, drive, whatever you're trying to achieve. So,
right. There's been so much research in the last, I would say, 20 to 25 years. Like Barbara Fredrickson was one of the key researchers on positive emotions. And she said that when we put ourselves in positive emotions, on our brain, it has what she calls a broaden and build effect. And it opens up, creativity. I mean, they've done studies where people who are in a positive state, they outperform in sales. They outperform their peers. They outsell their peers by 40%. Oh, wow. And they've done things around like studies around, people are better negotiators. So it's really, it's very, very powerful, that science.
Sometimes clients, they talking about positive psychology, but then, sometimes, they're on a good streak but maybe they hit a hiccup and they get stuck. How do you, I know that's the problem, the stumbling block. How do you get unstuck and just move forward quickly?
Yeah. Because that's something that we've all faced, and it can happen at any time on our journey. So to me, getting unstuck requires that we take some kind of action. And I don't even care how small the action is, right? It's just something to get us started. And because then from there, there's a little framework that I came up with, but I call it learn your way forward. So it's a AAA, and it starts with action. And so we take an action, and it doesn't matter how small. It could be talking to someone else about it, could be researching, it could be whatever. But we take some kind of action. Then the second step is to assess. How did it go? What did I learn? And then the third step is to adapt. So if it went well, how can I continue this? If it maybe didn't go as well as we wanted, okay, we still learned something. So how can we adapt? Because that will get us forward. That will get us moving forward. Because I think so many times we get stuck. We hit a wall, and then it goes back to, I don't have the whole plan. I don't know how to get started. It's got to be bigger. And sometimes it can be just the simplest action that will move us forward. But I always say that action is the antidote for despair, because it gets us started.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is I think Paul Graham, and he was talking about, especially with startups, and you're dealing with the unknown, but then he was saying, action produces information. And so, and could be wrong information, but at least you take action, and then it snowballs. So
that's right. I'm writing that down. I love that.
And then what is the one trap that just keeps people stuck, that they can't get out of it? They just hang-ups, what is that trap?
Yeah. Well, one of the big ones is that, what we've talked about in terms of, I have to have the whole plan. The other one that's probably just as big is, and it's related to mental fitness, And that is the stories we tell ourselves. If you want to call those, some people call them self-limiting beliefs. Sometimes we call them those patterns that we fall into. But think about how many times someone is about to take action, and then that voice of doubt shows up and says, yeah, but are you sure you can do it? Or what will other people think? Or what if you fail? Or there's 1,000 things that might say to us. So getting comfortable with, what those patterns are for us, because those keep us stuck. They keep us exactly where we are.
Yeah, that's interesting. The stories and then having a plan. Then also what's interesting is when you talk about so getting unstuck, and a lot of people get hung up on failure because they think, okay, failure, I failed. And but tell us why failing is a great thing.
Because I think it goes to the quote you said earlier, right? Failing almost always produces information. And so there's that. There's also, I love cross-country skiing. So this is a good metaphor for it, or an example, because I grew up in the Midwest in Illinois, where everything's super, super flat. Mm-hmm. And then we moved to Colorado to 9,000 feet. So we're way up high in the Rocky Mountains. We're right outside Rocky Mountain National Park. So nothing's flat there. And I remember the first time I saw some of these hills, I was terrified. I'm like, I'm not going to ski down that. You're nuts. I'm going to fall, Yeah. But when I ski down those hills, even if I fall, I learn something, right? Because I learned, you know what, here, my technique was wrong or whatever it might be. So it helps me learn. But the other great thing about failure is that it expands my comfort zone, right? Because think about it. If the worst thing that I think is going to happen is I'm going to fall, and then I fall and I survive, it's not so scary anymore. So it makes it easier to take on the next challenge. Yeah. And one of the things I had a ski instructor tell me, and he's a former competitive cross-country skier. And he said, anytime you're trying something new, we can't let the fear of failure or just fear in general get in our way. And he said, so don't try it once, don't try it twice, a minimum 3 times. And I'm like, why? And he said, the first time is to prove it to yourself that you can do that thing. The second time is to kind of bring some normalcy, like, okay, it wasn't a fluke that I made it down the hill. The third time is that's the earliest time when you can start to evaluate, did I like that experience? Because the first 2 times you're probably petrified. But I thought that is really great advice, not just for skiing, but for a lot of the things that we do in our lives. Don't just try it once. That's not a real try. Like, really give it a real try.
Yeah. Like putting yourself out there, making yourself vulnerable, just going all in, even if you fail, not being dependent on, what happens, being,
So. Just because you're going to learn, right? I mean, you're going to learn, and learning is never failure.
Yeah, exactly. So you brought up an interesting point was, the worst that could happen. And what's really interesting is, these days we hear about the great resignation and great reshuffle. Yeah. And, I think COVID had a positive effect because, the people were like, oh, if I'm locked up in my home, and, we can still survive this, how bad can it get? So people are taking risks and starting their own companies and pursuing their dreams, and they're like, okay, it can't be that bad, so I'm gonna quit my job and try something new. And so it's really, what you're saying really fits into that.
Yeah, just think about it. If we survived that, Yeah. Plus I think that COVID gave people a great place to kind of pause and reflect and say, what's important to me?
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, out of turmoil comes beauty, and beauty from your ashes. So
that's right.
This has been a really fascinating conversation. I'll conclude with this kind of this final question was, we talked about some of the key events in your life that set you on this path, and looks like you had when the doctor told you had a 3% chance of a full recovery. Tell us about that and kind of close it out there.
Yeah. So that was back in 2003. I got sick. I collapsed, and it took It took 18 months to finally get a diagnosis. But yeah, at one point, the doctor said to me, he's like, based on what we know so far, you probably have about a 3% chance of a full recovery. And I remember saying to him, because I'd always been a runner, and I remember saying, well, when can I go for a run again? He's like, Bobbi, he said, you might have to accept that your days of being an athlete are over. And I thought, no, I've always been an athlete. I will always be an athlete. So when he said that about, 3% will experience a full recovery, the way my mind heard it was not that 97% wouldn't, but that 3% would. So I thought, well, then I have to learn what those 3% did, or I have to find a doctor who can help me. And eventually I did. She's like, I've seen this before. She said, it's not going to be a fast recovery. It will take at least 2 years. But she said, you can recover. And it was extremely powerful. And it taught me, man, did that teach me a lot about myself. When you go through that kind of challenge, you're really introduced to who you really are.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it sort of strips through everything and just lays everything out there. And that's, and I know a lot of people are inspired by your story. I know you do a lot of coaching, and a lot of my audience are women executives, entrepreneurs. How can they follow you, contact you, follow you on social media, and work with you?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So I have my website. It's just www.bobbikahler.com. And then on LinkedIn, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I do quite a bit of posting there. I try to share at least 3 times a week because I always want to have content around how can we get unstuck, how can we create new options for ourselves, and how can we move forward faster. And so those are the best ways. And then, of course, I have a podcast as well. If someone wants to check it out, that'd be terrific. And it's just Unyielded, thriving no matter what.
Excellent. Yeah. And thanks for sharing all that. And for all the audience out there, all of Bobbi's resources will be in the links and show notes. And thanks so much for such a insightful conversation about mental fitness and resiliency and just thriving under any situation. So we look forward to hearing about your success, and we'll leave it at that.
Thank you.